Thanks, Ken. Good evening, and look, Ken's been very generous, but it's really good to be here tonight because I'm a country bloke and have been for all but 6 years of my life, and so what I'm going to bring to you tonight are my experiences and applications in the rural context. And I've lived and worked in Victoria and South Australia, so be kind to me, and we'll see what we can do. So the first thing I want to really talk about is water and climate change and what's coming. And there are a heap of reports around the place, the Bureau of Met, the regional reports, the state climate change adaptation framework. Who knows about that here, by the way? A couple, three? Yeah. Look, you got to look at it. It's been available since 2012. Our government is really poor at getting out into the community and telling us about these sorts of things. Of all reports that I've read in the last few years, this is one of the most frightening. And I think that's why they don't want the community to know about it. But the critical thing is that we're heading into far less rainfall than this state has ever experienced, particularly in the last couple of hundred years of European settlement. So what I'm saying that our solution can be quite simple, and we need to capture and store a lot more water than we do. There have been some terrific things that have happened in the Adelaide or the Greater Adelaide metro area in the last few years, and that's been the focus. And yet I'm saying we've got to get out a lot more into the rural areas and the regions, because there are a lot of people out there that also are going to be stuck with this declining rainfall, this rainfall deficiency. We've got some wine makers, wine growers from the Riverland, and they're going to confront the same issue. But they're ahead of the curve right now because they're doing something about their soils. So what I'm saying is that we also need to treat that fresh water that falls out of the sky, and we contaminate it, and we need to treat it, and we need to reuse it, and we can do it all on site and all at the property scale. Tonight I'm going to share three stories with you, and one is about reed bed wastewater treatment for households, and I'm going to talk about some applications in schools and wineries. I'll just give you a brief glimpse about design procedures, and I'll give some examples. The next part will be about water sustainability of a 200-site retirement village that I've been fortunate to be the designer for in a place where I lived, in Cobram in Victoria. And then we'll finish off with the opportunities in retrofitting small towns and communities with neighbourhood type wastewater treatment systems. Reed beds. These are natural wetlands. Look, a potted history first. Natural wetlands have been used for more than 100 years to receive wastewaters, and in this country, in Australia, up until the 80s, late 80s, there were a lot of discharges into freshwater systems from industrial and human processes. Just deplorable. You might think, oh, why? Look, the Murray River was being used as a sewer. There's no doubt about it. That has stopped. But the early 1970s also saw the development of constructed wetland technology, free water surface wetlands. And in terms of reed beds, the Max Planck Institute in Germany between 1960 and 1980 did a lot of research about subsurface flow wetland technology. And this is your reed bed type system. And they use the root zone method, RZM. And So the RZM, that was the beginning of reed beds, as I said, and they were really taken up right through Europe and North America and Australia later on. And there are thousands of systems installed in Europe, and some serving communities of up to 5,000 people. They're quite large. These are not free water surface wetlands, they're subsurface or horizontal flow wetlands. That permaculture practitioners were the early takers of reed bed treatment systems for treating domestic wastewaters. They were ahead of the curve in that sense. Towards the end of the middle and towards the end of the 1990s, Southern Cross University thought that, we need to do some work here to see what the contaminant reduction is in reed bed treatment systems, and I'll come to that later on. Now, as I said, there's likely to be many hundreds of reed bed treatment systems at the domestic scale, the household scale, installed around Australia, and in South Australia there's probably several hundred. I've designed 70 of them, so there'd have to be at least 3 or 4 times that. So what I want to introduce you to before we go much further is what a trench type reed bed system looks like. And you can see that there's a little plan up the top there and an elevation down the bottom, and your wastewater comes in at the top. It goes into a larger stone area at the front. The water goes through a gravel bed, which is about 700 millimetres deep. The water level in this one is at 600 millimetres deep. This particular reed bed is around about 11 metres long. It's rectangular, 11 by 2 or 2.5 metres. So it's based on detention time of 5 days. We'll come to that later on. It moves its way through the system there. The aquatic plants, the macrophytes, as they're called, large plants, grasses, they do all the biological action. The treated water then drops into a pump chamber, from where it is then sent to a subsurface drip irrigation system, and we'll come to that later as well. There's a trough type arrangement, and these are stock troughs, and I really like using off-the-shelf products, because there's no point in reinventing the wheel, is there? And stock troughs make really good reed bed treatment systems as holding vessels. The same principle, it's based on detention, except you've got to have a series of these troughs, 1, 2, 3, depending on the design daily flow. But let's go back. Why reed bed treatment? Well, in Australia there are more than 250,000 septic systems, and they serve around about 2 million people, and that's a lot of septic systems. They're mostly in rural areas. They are mostly black water, that is your toilet water plus all your other waters from the household. Grey water, as you know, is your shower water and laundry water. It doesn't include your toilet water. But they must have primary treatment. Both your black water and grey water systems must have primary treatment. That is, they pass through a chamber of some sort, e.g. septic tank, to trap the solids. And we'll show you what's in wastewater in a tick. But secondary treatment is not a requirement under Australian standards and under our codes. And that has produced a big problem, because failure of septic absorption systems, you know, your soakage trenches, it is astronomical. And back in the, probably 12 years ago, I attended a conference in Armidale, and Southern Cross University had just done some research, or finished, and they had they did it for New South Wales, and they found that there are 40% failure of septic absorption systems, and these are in really sensitive catchments, Blue Mountains, for example. At the same time, there's a guy from the EPA from South Australia who attended that conference, and I asked him the question, well, what do we know about septic absorption system failures here in this state? And he said, well, they didn't know, but they had an idea that it could have been 50% or so in the Adelaide Hills. Now that's huge. So it's a serious problem. And my whole thing, I'm a permaculture bloke too, is that we should never send untreated wastewaters into the soil. We should treat them at least to a secondary stage. And the failure has been around the lack of understanding of the capability of soils to handle continual barrages of wastewaters. And they're full of oils and fats, and they're full of household detergents and chemicals and things like that. And if we don't understand the characteristics of soil, for example, sodicity, they will clog up. And that's what's happened. That's caused the failure. So you've probably read what the constituents are in domestic effluent. Have a look at all that. And that's a pretty big list, isn't it? And so a secondary treatment prior to discharge should be a preferred step. It really should be. That's my personal view, even though the codes and the Australian standard 1547 doesn't require it. And so what I'm saying, enter reed bed treatment systems. Now, I mentioned about Southern Cross University earlier, and there've been a bit of research done in South Australia as well, UniSA, the Intelligent Home, probably in the mid to late 90s, 97, 98, and I don't know whether that's still going or not. But these are the results of what reed bed treatment systems do in contaminant removal. BOD, 88%, up to total suspended solids, 85. E. coli, these are your pathogens, 90 to 99%. Nitrogen removal, 83. Phosphorus, 78 to 90. It varies though. Look, there are going to be climatic variabilities, but that's what Southern Cross University has come up with. What the other important thing is that there hasn't been enough ongoing research. We don't know what the performance is of reed bed treatment systems in all sorts of different climates. That's the approval procedure in South Australia. The formatting got lost there again. You probably know about that. And there's the on-site wastewater systems code, a pretty new one now, and reed bed treatment systems are included in that. One of the important things though is that they've now introduced the requirement that site and soil parameters are required to be assessed by a wastewater engineer. We got any wastewater engineers here tonight? Well, they reckon I'm one, but I'm not. It's only through experience, and I think it's just a generic term. Although I used to be qualified in Victoria. But the other important thing is ASNZS 1547. And the critical thing is the installation, operation and maintenance manual. We'll come to that too later on. So reed bed system uses. Have we got any planners here tonight? Brilliant. So these are the sorts of things that can be where reed bed treatment systems can be used. Rural properties, peri-urban land, that's on the outskirts of urban areas. People seeking a natural wastewater treatment system requiring minimal energy input. Generally, it's just the sun that drives the whole process, not like aerated wastewater treatment systems, which requires an external energy input to keep bubbling away, to keep the oxygen moving in the whole mix. So the sun drives it. People may want to upgrade sensitive catchments. A reed bed footprint is quite small, around about 25 square metres. That's the treatment area. But thereafter, of course, you've got to have you've got your wastewater, your treated water, shouldn't call it wastewater, you've got your treated water, where does it go? And we'll come to that later on, it goes to irrigation areas and can be used on lawns, fruit trees, vines, anything. But your minimum property size for a reed bed wastewater treatment system is generally around at least 700 square metres from my experience. You're really taxing at the limits there if you haven't got that size property. By the way, greywater treatment systems, greywater reed bed treatment systems, you can get away with a much smaller irrigation area. So they could be a really good option for some time in the future when the next drought comes, and it will. So how do reed beds work? They consist of gravel media in a sealed container, and I take you back to that image I showed you earlier on, the cattle troughs and the rectangular bed. Suitable aquatic plants. The primary treatment, of course, occurs in the septic tank, and that removes all those other nasties. The wastewater moves through the reed bed, down through the gravel substrate there, the media. Natural treatment processes occur. The plants leak tiny little amounts of oxygen through their roots, the rhizomes, and that does all the action. There are aerobic and anaerobic conditions within the substrate and around the rhizome area, and it creates the right environment internally there for microorganisms that do all the chewing up. And they, as I've said there, they are mostly responsible for pollutant removal. Now, I've found in ours that earthworms play a great role. Goodness knows where they come from. They must crawl in at night, but they inhabit the reed bed, and they colonise it, and they do all the beautiful stuff and create nutrients, particularly for when you want to use the treated water for irrigation. Now, pollutant removal is time dependent, of course, and in reed bed treatment systems like this, 5 days minimum is the detention time. Reed bed plants. Now, these are some of the proven ones in Australia, in the Australian context. The emergent macrophytes, as they're called, Phragmites australis, which is common reed, and that is the plant that's used almost universally globally in reed bed treatment systems. It's just such a wonderful plant, and it's annual, of course, but I've found that photo there is of my little first tub, a greywater treatment system, just prior to, would have been 3 months for May I think it was. It goes into a gestation period, very short, during winter, a couple of months, it dies off. You prune everything down, remove the vegetation. You should see it now. I was going to take a photo to show you tonight, but I ran out of time. But the growth rate is just phenomenal. Now, the plants, the macrophytes, can be obtained by tube stock or from specialised plant nurseries, or you can take from existing reed beds, divide it up. The rhizomes themselves are quite clumpy, so you just cut them up, you put them in around about every 30 or 40 centimetres. If you have several tubs like your cattle troughs and you want Phragmites in one, and you want green in the other, and then you use your cypress or your Schoenoplectus, your club blush. Now, reed bed containers. The photo on the left there is one we'll come to shortly, and that's beginning of quite a large system at Unity College at Murray Bridge. So you can use the trench system there at a much smaller scale in the domestic sense, or cattle troughs and stock troughs they're called. These are just inserted in the ground, at the right depth there, and in this one here there are three tubs, 2 at 3 metres diameter, 1 at 2.16, and that provided sufficient volume to contain the daily flow, design daily flow. But reed beds, of course, that photo on the left, you can see that there's polypropylene liner, HDPE actually, on a geotextile fabric. And it's important that they are impermeable, because the reeds themselves, some of them, particularly your bulrushes, are really vigorous and they can penetrate some of these light liners. By the way, back in the 90s, people were actually using clay liners, and they failed so much and leaked, and the roots would just penetrate through the side, so they got rid of that idea. There's the design procedure, really simple. A design population in South Australia, indeed in most states, the minimum is 6 equivalent population, household of 6. But your daily flow, it depends on your water source. In the code, the South Australian code, if you're on totally rainwater, it's 125 litres per person per day, 750 litres, design daily flow. If you're on mains water, it's 150. Now, obviously, people on rainwater are more frugal, but the daily flow rate, you must allow for spar bars. Spars seem to be a thing today, quite common, and so that can be anything up to 200 or 300 litres has got to be factored into the design daily flow rate. It's enormous. So your reed bed's got to be bigger. Container type and aspect ratio, it doesn't matter. At the aspect ratio, some people have said 4:1, 3:1. It doesn't really matter. I'll show you some photos later on where I've got one 100 metres long by 1.5 metres wide, and they're in steps. It doesn't matter. The round troughs, there's no aspect ratio there. Oh, your aspect ratio is length by width. Hydraulic residence time, or detention time as it's called, 5 days. The media, 20 millimetre gravel, it seems to be the most successful, and that's got 40% porosity. The effective water depth, of course, is another design factor, and that's the little formula down the bottom that's used to determine the square metre of the reed bed. So water balance in the reed bed. Hey, how are we going for time? I might have to keep racing here, I think. Yeah, right. Water balance in the reed bed. Well, what we look at there is crop factor, the effect of rain on the reed bed, to then determine your peak flow rates, and that could be anything from 400 litres in summer to 1,600 litres in winter, because your reeds, I've measured it in my little reed bed, 70 centimetres, 7 centimetres or 70 millimetres of water has been extracted from the reed bed in one day in the middle of summer, 38-degree day. That's huge. That's more than 10% of the depth of the water was extracted by the reeds from that one reed bed. So hence, you don't get much flow coming out at the end. trench liners. They need to be robust, resist puncture, so HDPE, high density polyethylene, or EPDM is another one, or butyl rubber. That's a good product because it's much more flexible to use. Treated water use, subsurface drip irrigation, as I mentioned before, lawns, gardens, vines, fruit trees, nut trees, and there are 4 subsurface drip line products there that can be used successfully. Essentials of site soils, this is really important because this is, as I said earlier, it's one of the major factors in design of the irrigation area. And you've got to determine your texture and soil pH and EC and all that sort of stuff, sodicity as well. So you put everything together to determine the length of the drip line and the size of the irrigation field. And there's another little formula there to work out your water balance. Of course, in subsurface drip irrigation systems, you've got to have a little filter to entrap the microscopic stuff, the real fine stuff. You've got to have an air release valve to get the air out of the line when the pump starts, and a flushing trench, part of the maintenance of the whole thing. Reed bed examples, there's a 2-trough system there. There's my little one, it's 15 years old now, that's 3 different sorts of grasses. These are Phragmites at the start, just pruned, and there's one of a recent look. There's the Unity College one. These are 3 by 64 metre long reed beds. That's the picture on the left in 2010, and that's 2014. That's pretty recent, only last week. And that's designed for peak daily flow of 17.4 kilolitres, and they aren't getting that, of course. But it's designed for a population of 830 people. They've got not quite that. Winery reed beds. The one on the left is a little small winery using stock troughs again, a septic tank, just off-the-shelf product, septic tank to entrap all your solids, primary treatment, and there are 5 stock troughs that just cascade down through the system. This has just recently been planted. This is in January this year, just planted. The one in the middle there is Seven Hill Winery, and that's several years ago now, that photo. And the one down the bottom is O'Leary Walker Winery, 45 kilolitres per day. There's something not right there, and I've got to follow up with them over that. They've scoured out some of the aggregate in there, and I don't know what for. But that's pre-winter. That's some of it's dying off. Oh, by the way, this is the 500 metre long reed bed in 5 rows, and the treated water gets dispersed over into it gets stored in the dam over there, and it goes back into the vineyards. So they've closed the loop in that sense. In fact, their water supply is the water off the roof of the winery. They're holding around about 1 megalitre on site in tanks. Okay, part 2. We'll have to race now. This is a water sustainability case that I was involved in. I think I mentioned earlier that I designed in Cobram in Victoria. You can see, does everyone know where Cobram is? Have you been there? Been through it? Yeah. Nice little town. It's on the river. You can see the River Murray, about 5,000 people. My client there, this village here called Oasis. He's got an Italian background, so his theme was palm trees, and so he planted a whole heap of palm trees in there. That is 179 sites there, but it's all hooked up to the town system. So he then bought this farm here because he wanted to, the demand for this sort of dwelling was huge. is getting people down from Queensland and all over the place, interstate, and so he said, I've got to keep going. So hence green palms, green sustainability, because I've been working on him so hard to get some sort of sustainable focus into his development, and that's what we're going to come to now. So Green Palms Phase 1 is 150 sites, plus he's got approval now, or pretty close to it, for another 50. So it's in a grid layout, quite simple, really easy. These sites are only 300 square metres. He owns the land. He derives income as rent from the land. He provides all services except electricity for $80 a week. Now the key objective is sustainable development, and I've had to work on him a lot. He's changed a bit, particularly in water and wastewater, and this is where the novel aspect of this development comes in. The potable water is sourced from rainwater harvested from all the roofs of the buildings. These little, there's a shot, there's a typical street view in August 2013. These little houses close together. People cash out from the cities, they come up, they love this sort of thing. They buy the house, put it on the site. By the way, my mate, the developer, he builds the houses as well, so he's getting it both ways. And they've got money in their pocket. So all those roofs there, they're capturing the water, and it goes to these tanks down there on the right, the 275,000 litre tanks, and held in storage, and then distributed back under pressure to all the houses. I won't go through all the technical details, but each site produces around about 50 kilolitres a year under average rainfall. The groundwater there is excellent, and so he's got a water licence there, is a former farmland, and so he was able to tap into that easily. So that provides the supplemental water supply. Wastewater treatment, a similar thing, all treated on site. Oh, by the way, but by doing this, he avoids paying what's called headworks charges to the water authority in Shepparton, and so he's saved a heap of money by doing all this himself. There's an on-site wastewater treatment plant there on the left, a tertiary treatment step, a maturation pond, and a storage pond just beyond that, back there. All this water gets treated and is then distributed into subsurface drip irrigation back into the wide-spaced areas there. The ponds are lined, and there are a lot of site soil assessments done on the property. The crop factors were determined for the vegetation and all that. There's a heap of compliance required of Victorian EPA. And the third arm of all this was stormwater, and all the stormwater is conveyed in surface drains, swales, wide swales, no pipes, and it gets reused. It's stored in constructed wetlands. And the bird life there is increasing. As more vegetation comes in and more water, the bird life's amazing. So the third and final part in all this, the opportunities in wastewater. Well, opportunity number one is our community wastewater management schemes or systems in South Australia. And there are 172 of them, serving 200,000 people. These are in the country towns. There's 28 megalitres of water, wastewater produced each day, and that's got a daily notional value So you apply about $3, well it's $3.52 isn't it now, it's $84,000 per day. But most of that water's evaporated. It's put into ponds, oxidation ponds, which aren't, many of them have failed, and it's not reused. So I'm saying that one great opportunity is agroforestry, because local government sitting on the biggest land bank in South Australia, which is vacant road reserves. Opportunity two, this is a case study in Tail and Bin I did 7 years ago now, where the oxidation pond had failed and it wasn't working as it should have. The town had 10 pump stations, so the idea here was, let's divide the town up into 3 catchments, each of those catchments to have its own wastewater treatment plant, and that's what could have been the solution in that photo there. It's an Aussie Clean product. And opportunity 3, retrofit schools with independent systems. And this is about, I've been involved with schools in water harvesting, and they've got a great opportunity, I think, because they have a lot of green space, is why don't they take themselves off the sewer system or the community wastewater management system and treat their wastewaters on site and put it back into subsurface irrigation onto their ovals and their green space. That's an opportunity. There are 4 examples. Watervale Primary School, they've got a reed bed, designed that, and treated water into the oval. Clare High School captures rainwater, stores in 2 dams and is reused on the vineyard. Unity College, we've seen at Murray Bridge, and Boolaroo Centre District School, they capture all rainwater from roofs, and that's their rainwater harvesting dam there with a reed bed at the entry for cleaning up some of the contaminants. Opportunity 4, reduce the reliance on the stressed Murray River. It's crazy extending the pipeline out to places like Kimber when they could be capturing and harvesting and storing water from these large roof areas that they have around the town. Millions of dollars was spent on that. And that's all. Oh, by the way, that's a book I've written on reed beds, the reed bed book. That's it. Thank you.